Great. I'd like to call this meeting of the Environmental Advisory Board to order. I think the first thing on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes, seconded, or is it just the motion? Can't remember, but yes.
I think you make the motion and someone else has to
Motion to
second it.
approve the minutes.
Anyone else willing to second? I don't know that I can.
I don't think you can. Yeah.
I mean, I'll second, but I wasn't on for the entire call last time.
That's true. Marty, Susan?
I'm happy to second.
Great. All right, is everyone in favor of approving the minutes? They looked fine to me.
Yes.
Aye.
Great. All right, with that, I guess we're on to public participation. Seems like we have one member of the public. I assume who wants to speak?
Yes, so Heidi, could you please bring up the rules slides?
Oh, of course. Hold on, let me pull up the right.
So as is, go ahead, Heidi.
And Brett, just a reminder when we come to public participation to unmute the speakers.
Yeah. Okay. So we have one person from the public here to speak tonight, I believe. Lynn, if that is you, we do ask, as I think you know, that all public participants rename themselves with their full name. In the upper right-hand corner of your photo of your meeting tile, you'll see those three dots. If you could please just go up there and put rename, hit the rename while I'm reading the sort of rules that we're required to read. So this is the protocol for all public meetings conducted over Zoom that we sort of lay out the ground rules. So we're pleased to have everyone join us to strike the balance between meaningful and transparent engagement and online security. The following rules will be applied for this meeting. The meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Activities that disrupt, delay, or otherwise interfere with the meeting are prohibited. The time for speaking or asking questions may be limited. No person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding, and no person shall speak for longer than the time allotted. Each person shall register to speak at the meeting using that person's real and full name. Any person believed to be using a synonym will not be permitted to speak at the meeting. If someone comes into the meeting with a telephone number or a name associated with a specific device, the host may ask for a full name before allowing the individual to speak. No video will be permitted for those speaking except for city officials, employees, and invited speakers and presenters. All others will participate by voice only. The person presiding at the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates any rule. If the chat function is enabled, it will be used for individuals to communicate with the host. It should be used for technical online platform related questions only. If an attendee attempts to use chat for any reason other than seeking assistance from the host, the city reserves the right to disable the individual's access to chat. Only the host and individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share the screen during this meeting. Okay, so I think we're now ready for public participation. I am going to unmute Lynn Siegel. Thank you, Lynn, for including your address and your name anyway. So Heidi, if you could share the screen for the timer. As you all know, Lynn, that you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. So I'm going to have you.
Can I ask you things?
Go, you can use your 3 minutes in any way that you'd like, Lynn.
Could you switch it so that this meeting doesn't conflict with another one? I've tried to go to this meeting for 6 months. You always conflict, I believe, with Landmarks Board. And it's not fair to have these things conflicting because I've got enough things to do without having to have 2 city meetings in a night. It's really inappropriate. So can you do that? Or does this conflict? Because I haven't been able to go. Also, you haven't been meeting. Why haven't you been meeting for 5 months?
So Lynn, after you've completed your...
yeah, I'm waiting. Why haven't you been meeting for 5 months?
Because we've been working out our COVID protocols, Lynn. And because
yeah, well, planning board's been meeting every week. Use tables has been meeting every week for 5 months. So like, what's the problem with EAB? I just don't understand.
So Lynn, we were following the city's protocols. We can't change the meeting. The meetings are set by the city manager's office.
Right, but why haven't you been meeting? Planning board has been, I'm saying, all the time.
Lynn, as I said, we were following the protocols given to us by the city.
Okay, so who do I talk to with the city to get this resolved? Because this is not okay.
The city manager's office, Lynn?
Like who? Jane?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, yeah. So what I want to know is why is EAB not involved with the resiliency program and the Excel situation and all of the larger issues in Boulder about environmental issues? Why is it just reduced to like the landfill type issues and like composting and like, you know, like I don't understand the whole board, the function of the board, and then it hardly ever meets. So to me, it seems like it's kind of a wasted resource for the taxpayers to cover.
Lynn, if you'd like to go back and look at the minutes from the previous meeting, I don't think you were able to attend the September meeting or the August meeting. You'd see that we actually did cover the Excel issue.
And what else? What did you say about the Excel issue?
You can find that in the minutes of the meeting, Lynn.
Yeah, but can you just tell me briefly?
No,
Like,
I can't. I'm
general
sorry.
idea.
You'll have to go back and review the minutes, Lynn.
Yeah, well, when I'm reviewing, I'm covering 8 boards, Brett, so it's hard for me to go to agendas and read. You know, I only get 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, so I kind of would like a little help here. I'm trying to get the whole broad picture in Boulder, and I think that the EAB needs to be part of the broad picture, and I don't see it very much in that kind of a scope, and that's very disturbing to me because it is the EAB. So can't you argue the case a little bit, or what? I mean,
Lynn, we're all adapting to the COVID situation, and the EAB will now be meeting regularly and be hearing all the issues related to the environment.
yeah, I'm aware of that, but the COVID's been around since March, and like I said, planning board's been meeting like crazy. So done, bye. I guess that's the end of me, and I'm just a black box.
Okay, thank you, Lynn, for your comments. I think
Okay,
that's
thanks a lot.
public participation tonight.
Great. So I think the next thing on our agenda is the first discussion item. With you, Brett, talking about update on what the council decided around prairie dogs.
I'd like to actually make a suggestion tonight in terms of our agenda, since it's sort of more of a retreat format, that we come into the discussion section. Sorry, oops. Oh, I'm so sorry, Marty. We need to make you a co-host, which we just didn't get because you came in. Sorry, hold on. Now, Marty, you should be able to unmute yourself. Sorry about that. So what I'd like to suggest tonight is that we come into the discussions of those topics after we do a little bit of kind of warming up a bit and also kind of setting the stage for these issues, because I think we can put those issues in context and then use them to think about this sort of broader view of what EAB will be could be thinking about in this year. I think it's interesting that Lynn, rightly points out that there has been a disruption in the EAB's schedule because everything's taking place. And that really kind of creates both the need and the opportunity for us to step back. And we typically would have a full 3-hour segment for a retreat because of the digital format. I didn't want to impose that experience on all of you. So we've just extended this a little bit. So what I'd like to do though, is to we also have a new board member, which I think some of you maybe haven't had a chance to interact with Susan that much yet. So we're going to do a little bit of dyad work. We're just kind of get ourselves warmed up here. And I'm going to get you into breakout rooms with just one other person. And I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of questions in the dyads. The questions, and I'll put these in the chat. The questions will be, who are you? And kind of a brief history of yourself and what you're currently doing. And then one thing that most people don't know about you, and I'd like the other person to listen quite carefully, because when we come back into the main room, I'd like each person to introduce the other person. So it's kind of an opportunity to listen and learn about each other. So let me just put these questions into the chat. Okay, here we go. Okay, and so the breakout rooms are assigned automatically, and so I don't know who will be in each room, and I will probably end up with one of you, or Heidi and I will. So, Susan, did you want to make a comment?
Do you want me to read this oath before we proceed?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Yes,
That's
please.
good.
Yes, let's do that.
All right. I, Susan Peterson, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America and of the state of Colorado and the charter and ordinances of the city of Boulder, and faithfully perform the duties of the office of a member of the Environmental Advisory Board, which I am about to enter.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Very good. Now let's see if I can actually, oops. Oh, I am just suddenly, this is the danger of having somebody who hasn't done too much Zooming trying to make a breakout room. Lynn, it's interesting. We now have you under video, which we're not supposed to. This is, okay. And now I have to figure out how to do this breakout with, well, you know what? I'm going to have to avoid this because I can't figure out how to not have, I can have only the EAB members in this segment. So why don't we just go around and do this more conventionally. So Miriam, if you'd be willing to start, just say a little bit about yourself, and then maybe one thing that we don't know about you.
Okay. I am an environmental engineer. I specialize in air quality work in my career. Have been working in that field for 25 plus years. I have 2 kids. I have that are going through the COVID school in-house fun. and let's see, something y'all don't know about me. I think I said this last time, so let's see if anybody remembers. I sing in Boulder Chorale.
Oh, nice, right.
There we go.
Nice, thank you. Justin.
My name's Justin Brandt. I work in energy policy. Currently work at a nonprofit called the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. We advocate for increased energy efficiency and clean energy in 6 southwestern states. And in Boulder, about 5 years. Let's see, something you all don't know about me. Let's see. I've been taking advantage of the COVID situation to do a lot of trail running, which is exciting for me. So, see, did a 15-mile loop up on the Continental Divide last week. That was really nice.
Very nice.
That's been my use of quarantine.
Nice. Susan.
Let's see. I started out studying environmental engineering and switched to civil and structural. That was in the mid-70s. I then had a 40-year career that was primarily, I started out as a structural engineer and then I moved into high tech. During that career, I also helped to found a company called Renewable Choice Energy, where we were marketing the use of green energy certificates, and that was about 20 years ago, but I'm still very much connected with those folks. and working with the environment has always been kind of a sideline for me, not my main job. But now I'm retired. I retired 2 years ago. And so I have a little more time to devote to it. And I really do believe that we're in a climate emergency and that it's one of the most important things that I can devote my time to right now, which is why I applied for this board. And see, something that you don't know about me is I will never be able to make up for my terrible greenhouse gas footprint because I'm a million-mile flyer on 2 different airlines as a result of all my worldwide business travel. But I always took advantage of any mountain that was nearby. So I'm also an avid climber, and I've climbed Kilimanjaro and Mount Fuji and Mount Olympus and Mont Blanc and lots of 14ers in Colorado, and it's a real passion of mine.
Nice. Marty?
Well, hello, I'm Marty Hurling, and who am I was the question. That's an existential question. I'm a person that loves the environment. I could sit out on my deck and listen to the birds in our backyard and look at the clouds, and I get inspired by things like that. I could watch the grass grow and find that actually rather inspiring. So I guess that says I'm a little bit boring in some ways, but I do love the outdoors and anything outdoors. I came to Boulder in 1989 from Wisconsin, where I went to school. I've been working at NOAA for about 30 some odd years. I'm a climate scientist working for NOAA. My wife and I have been living in Boulder for quite a long time here. We have 3 kids who are all working in the workforce, and so we're grateful for that. What you may not know, what inspired me about the environment was sitting on an airplane, a Pan Am Boeing 707 in 1964, when my mom and dad called my brother and I to come from Europe to join them to establish a new homeland in America. And so I was inspired looking out the window at the clouds, and that always stuck with me. So if I am on an airplane, maybe not a million miles, but probably enough to be a complicit with the global warming catastrophe, that inspiration stands with me today. I always have my nose to the window looking out to see what it's doing outside. Welcome, Susan, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike San Clements. We've been in Boulder 11 years now. I work for the National Ecological Observatory Network and also for the University of Colorado at the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. I'm a soil biogeochemist. Something you don't know about me, let's see. I really like and do a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is essentially wrestling, but can't really do that during a pandemic. So I've been riding my mountain bike every morning at 6 a.m. instead. Gotten a lot faster. So that's been shaved 7 minutes off of this loop this morning, actually, that I've been doing. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I hear you. Heidi, do you want to just say a little bit about you, since they'll get to see you every month or so?
Oh, sure. So my name is Heidi Joyce. I provide administrative support to the Climate Initiatives Department. I've worked for the city for 24 years. I have one 12-year-old daughter, 3 dogs and a parrot, and a husband too. So huge animal lover. One fun fact, and this kind of goes way back, I performed on a drill team in the 1984 Olympics for equestrian, which was really fun.
Wow. Heidi, that's a reveal I've never heard in the department.
Yes, it was more like a halftime show, but it was a really cool experience.
I'm going to have to use this question more often around you. So, yeah, Brett Concairn, I've been with the city now 7.5 years. I grew up in Wyoming, so part of what you might not know about me is that I grew up in Wyoming, and I'm actually leaving right after this meeting on my first solo trip away from family for a very long time, and I'm going up to Wyoming to go wander around some of my old jaunts. I've done a lot of different things, mostly around sustainable land management and renewable energy, and working with indigenous communities and others around these types of issues. So, but really delighted to be here at the city. I'm also now serving as the director of an entity that the city has helped launch called the Urban Drawdown Initiative, where I'm also serving to other cities outside of Boulder working on this sort of issue. So anyway, that's a lot of fun to know more about all of you. So I suddenly realized, and I should have thought about this ahead of time, that being in the public meeting context, it does make our using breakouts and things somewhat more complicated, because technically they should all be accessible, at least visible to the public. So I'm going to try something. We'll see if this works. And so in the chat, let's see, or in your emails, I just sent all of you a link to a mural board. So I don't know if you've ever used Mural. It's essentially like a digital whiteboard. And so what you should see, if you get that link and it opens for you, is something that looks like this. So can you see an EAB action priorities map in front of you on the screen now?
It's asking for a work email. Should we just put in like whatever email we use for EAB?
Yeah. And can you see my screen now, the mural map? Okay, good. So tell me if it's letting you into this.
Do we have to make an account?
You shouldn't have to make an account. You should just be able to go in through the link.
It made me
It's
make
making
an
us
account.
make an account.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm sorry.
I just signed in with Google.
Okay. Justin, I see you. I see Mike. I see Susan. Well done. Marty, how are you doing over there?
I'm giving it he wants a password to get my account going here.
Uh-oh. The dreaded make a password. So for those of you who are in, well, maybe I could see a show of hands. Who has used Mural before? Oh, anyone? Okay, fantastic. It's really a lot like a whiteboard, and this is essentially a whiteboard that's got an image superimposed on it. But if you take your cursor out and go wander around in here, and let's just say, Mike, actually you can go just about anywhere, but double click. Just double click, not on top of something, but on something. Yeah, and you'll see that it immediately makes a sort of a sticky note.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've already made these for you. But just so you know, I'll show you a few kind of fun things about this. So, can you all see my screen? So I'm gonna make a sticky note up here. It's yellow. You can see I can make it bigger. It pulls up a menu of things. I can change the color here. I can put text in it. I can draw in it, or I can even also change it into a circle if I want. Oops, I think, let's see, let me try this again. Well, there's a way to make them circles. I'm not remembering at the moment. But what's really fun about it is you can actually also, you can load up images if you wanted to add things. You can come over to this bar on the left and you can say, let's see, I want something that has to do with boots. And it will immediately go to the internet, and you can then drag one of these over and we can have a boot image. And so there's a lot of fun things you can do with this. But what we're going to use it for tonight is something much simpler, which is I've made already a set of 3 sticky notes for each of you. And so you can go over and just click on it. And once you've clicked on it, you can start to write in it. You can zoom in and out with your mouse. So I'm going to just go in here and I'll just start in on Miriam's, and I could just start saying, okay. And what I'm going to ask you to do is say, what are the 3 issues or sort of big ideas that you're hoping that EAB could really focus on because of your own view of what's happening in the world and around environmental issues. So let's just say it's air quality. And so I would have you do all three of your sticky notes like that. I'll just take this out now. In fact, I can delete that, and then I can double click and make another one. And I'll just move that back down here. So, and then I'll zoom out. So don't move them out. We'll do that in a subsequent exercise, but for the moment, just go in here and fill in your three issues and see if that'll work for you. Excellent. Miriam's going. Fantastic.
Oh, there.
Yeah, and I can see somebody's needed to actually make their sticky note bigger. You can also do this by just zooming in, and then you won't need to make the sticky notes that much bigger, but either way it's fine. You can start big and then go smaller. And please give us three.
So Britt, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. It took me just a minute to get logged in and get into kind of had to down because I'm on an iPad to do this. So I had to download the app, but that's fine. But it looks like I'm on there now, but I'm a little bit confused as to, do you see that I'm in there?
I do.
So I'm looking for my sticky notes.
You're blue. Can you see the blue ones?
Oh, I'm blue. I see.
And if you can just go down and click on one of the blue ones.
Got it.
So yeah, there you go. So if you, Marty, go just down and click on, say, one of them.
Then you should drag. I mean, whatever.
You should be able to just
so fixated on getting on. I didn't listen to your directions.
That's all right. So if you see the blue sticky notes, just go and click on one of them. Can you? This could be an issue of iPad, so I'm not hadn't thought about that issue. Or Marty, you could do this. Tell you what, why don't you tell me what you'd like to enter and I can do it for you.
I think I have, let me see. I think I'm in the edit mode. Oh yeah, there it's type in. So that's working. Now remind me what it is that you're asking us to.
What are the three issues that you think that you would like to see the EAB focusing on over this next 6 months or so? And Mike, do you have a third issue?
Yeah, I was trying to decide which I was going to put. I was torn. I'm torn between a couple.
No worries.
I'm gonna go with. We're not supposed to be in any particular order of priority from left to right or anything, right, Brett? They're just.
That's correct. That's correct. So I will give you a sneak peek. So later on, after we've had our discussion of issues, we're going to come back to this and we're going to start trying to place these in this graphic of kind of importance and feasibility. Now, I think obviously we're putting these issues on the table because we think they're important. But we're going to try together to start mapping where we think they are in terms of importance and in sort of feasibility or just some way to start thinking about how we might prioritize those. So, but we're not going to do that yet. So I think it looks like we've got everybody. Oops, no, wait a minute. Marty, you're not yet. Not Marty.
I make a mistake?
No, we're not putting him out there yet. I'm going to put
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. There you go. Whoops.
Oops, I lost it.
There you go.
Sorry, very good. I didn't know what I was doing anyway.
Well, let's just take a quick look though. So, so Miriam's ideas, you want to just read them out, Miriam? Miriam, you're on mute.
I know, I'm dealing.
I'm sorry.
It's hard to go between all the different screens.
Yeah.
So what I said is I would like to see more transparent communication on how citizens can protect their health under negative air quality conditions. I'd like to see improved communication and transparency around the Excel deal and a plan of action around preparation and response to smoke impacts from wildfires.
Terrific. Thank you. Marty.
Yeah. Air quality, just very simple. This summer gives us a good example of that. I worry about heat stress and drought. This is sort of the climate change concern. One of the studies I'm currently doing is understanding the millennium drought in the Western US and making sense as to whether that is a mega drought that will go away or whether this is the drought of the future that we should be expecting as an ongoing concern. So I think we need to deal with that. And then really related to that drought and heat is the wildfire threat. And I'm thinking not just only the Colorado wide or the West wide, but really the Front Range, the urban interface with the wildland interface corridor. So the local wildfire threat.
Thank you. Yours are so nicely developed as topical stickers. That's perfect. Justin.
I guess I put the Excel franchise agreement, assuming it's passed by voters, and I guess the municipalization process if it's not. The CMAP process, which I guess I'm assuming is still somewhere out there in the city's COVID-related regions and ongoing. And I think we still have, I think what we've been doing on urban heat islands is interesting, and there's still lots of work we can do.
Yeah, perfect. Susan.
Yeah, so I headlined all of mine climate emergency because it makes me a little crazy that we're in a climate emergency, but very few people in the city seem to mention that very often. And I think I prioritize based on the things that I think if you just did a Pareto analysis are the biggest contributors. So number one is electricity production and distribution. You could put that right next to Excel franchise because that's essentially the short-term thing facing us. The second biggest producer of greenhouse gases is the way we fuel our transportation. So that's the second most important thing to me. And the third most important thing is building and urban planning because of the impacts of the way we're doing things on climate emergency. And you can put that near urban heat islands, which is one of the problems with the way we do building and urban planning.
Right here.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, great. And this is kind of a new one. And then Mike.
Yeah, so I had Excel and kind of along the same lines of Justin, depending on where that goes. I would just like to see something happen. So anything we can do to make something happen would be great. Urban heat. Oh, sorry, I had an extra blank sticky there.
That's okay. I needed that.
Urban heat is a big one for me. I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff to do there. And I've always liked this one because I think that a lot of what happens with climate is outside the scope of, you know, we can do whatever we want and produce no carbon, but that doesn't mean it's not going to get hotter here, but we can, you know, do something for our citizens by addressing the urban heat island and making it more pleasant to be here when it is hotter. And then soil quality, I think, is another good one. And there's a lot under that, but and I think sort of prairie dogs touch on that as well. There's a bunch of things that go there, but that's my big.
Okay, terrific. So as you can see, I've been trying to quickly do some categorization here. They mark out, or they clump pretty nicely. There are some good outliers here. That so we have soil quality and sort of transportation issues, which are a little different from others, but we have this urban heat, heat stress, climate emergency around buildings and planning. I'll put this one down here. And we have the Excel agreement. Let's move this kind of into the middle. And then wildfire threat and air quality. And so, and this is an air quality issue too, though, isn't it, Miriam? The wildfire aspect. So these are kind of closely related. Is that right?
As transportation can go in there too.
That's interesting. So that's another.
Sure, I'd be okay with that.
And when you thought of transportation impacts, Susan, what were you thinking about?
I'm thinking about the second biggest producer of greenhouse gases coming in at 28% is transportation.
So you were thinking about it as a GHG issue, which is an air quality issue and also, but a little bit different. Yeah. So we could make sure that we note that. So this is maybe.
So when you deal with air quality,
it's one of those great solution multipliers, right? You fix it for one thing and it fixes more than one thing. So
that's right.
it's right next to air quality.
Okay.
And if I had 4, I would have put air quality.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, let's leave that where it is, and we'll come back to this. But this is really interesting and useful, and I think very much aligned with how we have done the kind of issue identification we've done in the past. So I wanted to do that first before we go into the sort of topical discussions, just because I think it's kind of helpful to get a sense of what people's broader concerns are and what issues they're tracking. And that also probably gives us a little bit of a reference point as we listen to each other talk about what our perspectives on these issues that we're going to dive into now are. But before we go there, I wanted to just make sure that we kind of refreshed our understanding, our remembrance of what the charge of the EAB is. And in a way, as a way of also reminding us that there are certain sort of charter boundaries within which we're expected to operate. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But let's pull up in your packet. One of the documents is this Environmental Advisory Board mission. I think this is a really good way to start this conversation because it's the most concise description of what the EAB is. So the Environmental Advisory Board consists of 5 members appointed by the city, each to serve a 5-year term. It advises council and staff on issues including solid waste disposal, recycling, pollution prevention, energy, green building, integrated pest management, and air quality. So basically everything we've talked about in this discussion so far certainly fits into that domain. The board provides advice to other city boards and city council concerning the effects of any proposed master plan or revision on the physical environment. So that's actually kind of another specific feature that the EAB is called to review, which is any sort of master planning effort as well. And that includes up to and including even the comprehensive plan. So the second thing I wanted to look at quickly is the Environmental Advisory Board Charter. And specifically, I wanted to look at section 1.6, because that's where it really lays out the board's responsibilities. So again, this is essentially a bit of a more detailed description of what we just, which we read in the mission. So under 1.6 subsection A, the responsibilities include to advise City Council. This is very important. The Environmental Advisory Board and advisory boards in general are intended to really help council by being a sort of an extension of this citizens' leadership and advisory and oversight process to the city. To advise City Council and the city manager, which therefore includes all of staff, concerning waste management, recycling, energy efficiency, environmental risks, and pollution control, except and is already assigned to other boards and commissions. This is another piece that sometimes, it doesn't come up very often, but sometimes it could come up, like, for example, around open space issues. The EAB may have an opinion, but it could be that it's actually an issue that is clearly under the jurisdiction of OSBT to be the primary advisory board on. Same thing could happen around parks or other of these issues that sometimes overlap with us. To advise City Council concerning an appropriate advocacy role for the city and state, regional, and federal environmental matters. At the very beginning of this year, I think Marty had raised an issue asking for the Environmental Advisory Board to take a position on the federal emergency, the National Environmental Policy Act. So again, I think, Marty, that was entirely within the purview and the charter of the board to do such a thing. C, to advise the affected board and the City Council concerning the effects on the environment of any proposed city master plan or revision. And then this is a bit of the catch-all. D, to advise on environmental issues not specified by matters through C, listed above as authorized by the City Council. So there is this, this sort of opening that EAB can weigh in on other issues. Typically, City Council would be the one that sort of directed EAB to pick up an issue and look at it more deeply. Or City Council could say, if EAB started to look at something, no, that's not, since it's not in your charter, that's not something that you should look at. But I think everything that we've talked about so far is already well within the charter. So it's so perfectly legitimate for the board to be looking at. So but I think one of the most important things I do want to emphasize, and this is an issue that's come up many times in this board, and it ebbs and wanes depending on the kind of level of ambition, frankly, of the people who come onto the board, which is how much prerogative does the EAB have to pursue its own environmental concerns and interests versus its role in responding to what staff or council asks EAB to comment on. So one sort of typical dynamic of the Environmental Advisory Board under certain settings is that it pretty much just sits and waits for topics to be brought to it to respond to, whether that's staff having to bring matters before EAB because it's our obligation, if it's got an environmental issue in it, for EAB to give its feedback, or this is much more rare, but sometimes can happen, where council would say, we're interested in what EAB thinks about a particular issue. So that's a kind of very conventional way EAB is operated. A couple of years ago, some of the board members started to be frustrated that felt like that you were essentially being asked to kind of do a rubber stamping process and not having input on things ahead of time, or really having the prerogative to try to raise issues. And so actually EAB, in some ways, maybe more than many boards, started to agitate with council for a little bit more prerogative to explore issues that it viewed as relevant and within its charter. And that's where the work that this board has been exploring for several years around urban heat island and now around air quality really emerged as issues that came out of EAB, not necessarily came from staff or council. And so far, nobody has reined us in from that work, and it's been my interest to keep supporting the board in continuing to consider these issues, and tonight will be a good example. Miriam's going to provide a presentation that in many ways I view as an exploration by this board of an issue it thinks the city should be concerned about. And the next step in that process will be for us to think about, and for me and in my role to think about how I can bring that issue back to the city and see how it wants to prioritize that issue. So let me stop. I've been doing a lot of talking, but I did want to make that distinction. Susan?
I'm just wondering, as a new person here, how often has City Council actually asked EAB for advice since you guys, folks, have been here?
We write a letter every year that tells the City Council what our priorities are. And we provide that sort of information to them. And then based on that letter, we are given rein to go after topics that we think are important and that we can help guide the sustainability group to go forward with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's good information, but that wasn't really my question, because under section 1.6A, B, and C, it's to advise City Council, like when they ask us, but I'm kind of wondering if they ever ask us for advice.
They do in the respect that we are given the opportunity to comment on certain aspects that are brought to our attention, like the prairie dog issue or like the Excel issue. That's our opportunity to give advice.
So Susan, it's a good question, and I think the way the process is intended to be designed is that council wouldn't have to ask you for feedback on these key issues because staff would have already been here, and then staff is obligated to include your feedback in our memos that go then to council. There's a section in most memos that say, here's the feedback from Transportation Advisory Board, Parks Advisory Board, Environmental Advisory Board. So they wouldn't theoretically have to ask specifically for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but any Justin or Mike, anybody who's been here a little longer, do you want to add any comment to that?
No, I think Miriam did a good job, and you did a good job of kind of summing up how we provide feedback. Yeah, thanks.
Marty?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in this year's drafting of the letter that went to council, which we laid out some details of what were not called advice, but were called suggestions. And this is actually, I think Susan gets at an important point, and I struggled with it myself in a brief time. To me, there's a difference between a suggestion, a advice, and a recommendation. They carry different weights. And I know that gets into semantics, maybe a little bit of hair splitting, but at some high levels, I think at council level, those different phrases probably mean something different. They imply a different level of expertise, perhaps even authority or importance of what's being stated. And so maybe this is something we can talk about during the course of the evening as to, you know, where do we fall in terms of advice, suggestions, and recommendations. In the letter that we drafted here this past year, I'm just reading the lead paragraph. The words that are used are actually, we are providing suggestions for how Boulder can show leadership in the following areas. So that actually doesn't even use the word advice. It uses suggestions, and we're not a suggestion board. We are an advisory board, but do we go, is recommendation stronger than advice, at least in terms of the way council perceives it?
Yes. Other questions or comments? I have a few responses, but I want to see if there's anything else.
I was just going to say one other thing that we didn't talk about, but we'll talk about later, so I haven't mentioned it yet, was we do get to also sometimes have representatives on other like advisory efforts where people from a bunch of different boards come together, like the Greenways Advisory Committee, which we'll talk about later, because that's another interesting way I think we can provide, we end up providing advice, sort of filtering up through these other group efforts. Would you say that's right, Brett?
Yes, absolutely. And then there's another way that this board has actually done more than any other board I've seen, which is to call for joint board meetings. in which there's an issue that is perceived to be cross-cutting. We did this very extensively in 2016 around the drafting of the new climate action plan. We met with all of the other boards. And then last year we did this with regard to ecosystems, because we were really focusing as staff last year, or this was last year, on the ecosystems issues in climate. So that's another opportunity and option that this board has for broader engagement. So I'm wanting to emphasize this point because I want to make sure that we set reasonable or appropriate expectations for what role this board can and should play. And so what I would say is that we're blazing a little bit of new ground with this board to see how far, Marty, in a sense, we can stretch this from just responding to things provided to it versus seeing issues that it sees, that believes that there should be, that the city should be concerned about, which is, as Miriam said, the place that's typically raised is in the annual letter. And then council theoretically sets the agenda of the city about whether those issues from this board or others are made priorities for staff. And then a third category, which is perhaps being a little bit more assertive to say, yes, we see that you've set those priorities, but we think that this is actually relatively urgent for you to consider. And then it might be something that is not only emphasized in your annual letter, but there might be, and this is where the territory is new, and I frankly don't know exactly what forums we would use. If you wanted to move in this sort of, we need to make recommendations to you about how you move forward in this kind of interim way. So, and I think this is part of the reason I wanted to discuss this, is because I think we're starting to tread out into this territory around this issue of air quality. And because it is becoming increasingly urgent and has not yet been, as far as I have known inside our city organization, been prioritized, in part because of the way the jurisdictions over issues is distributed between city and county. So as Miriam knows better than anybody, like county is seen as the people who are responsible for public health and air quality. And therefore, we might do some codes and ordinances around, say, wood smoke or something, but that broader air quality is not something that we've seen as part of our domain. But if, as I think you're probably going to say tonight, Miriam, we think that there's a public health risks because of the way these jurisdictions are managing the issue, maybe it's one that needs to be raised somehow in the priorities for the city. So I don't want to overburden on this issue, but I just want to make sure we had that discussion, especially, I think it's almost worth having every year when we do this. So I did want to just quickly, so Susan, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that the fact we're in a declared climate emergency, I think makes a difference in terms of perhaps the scope of the Environmental Advisory Board. And the charter was written at a time when we were not in an a climate emergency. So, I think we need to take that seriously as a board.
I entirely agree with that. And I think it's a very important and legitimate statement to make in some way. And perhaps together we can think about how to most effectively say that, especially perhaps to council and the organization.
Yeah,
So,
I think EABs, for as long as I've been on it, have struggled with what our role is. We have no regulatory authority. We have no real defined regulatory role. It's just general advice. So, to me, it seems like the way we've added the most value are some of these issues where we're trying to bring attention to things that, orphan issues or whatever you want to call them, things that aren't getting much attention within the city. And, I think we all care passionately about things like the energy sector and the city's, municipalization in those process. But at least as long as I've been on EAB, it doesn't seem like we can too big an issue and there's a lot of people working on it and it's hard to figure out what, if any, impact we can have on that. So I guess to the extent, you know, I think the extent we can add value is probably thinking about these other things that have slipped through the cracks a little.
Yes, that I.
Yeah,
Justin, go ahead, Susan.
although I would say some of the key issues, we can use the Excel franchise agreement as an example. I would hope that we would feel like it's the responsibility of the Environmental Advisory Board to take a look at that situation through an environmental lens. Lots of people are looking at it through a financial and profitability lens or an equity lens or other lenses, but that as a board, that would be kind of like we take the reins on that and say, hey, from an environmental standpoint, here's what the outcome of the franchise agreement would be in 2030 and 2050 relative to the environment. And here's what it would be if we kept going with the municipality. You don't even necessarily need to make a recommendation, but at least give them the information from an environmental point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with the theory behind that. I just, as we've gone into how you actualize that type of thing, I think it's been difficult, you know, like Brett says, traditionally we're sort of responding, you know, I see EAB as that, you know, we work in two ways. There's and one is sort of the traditional way where, you know, staff brings us a report or something in draft form before it goes to council or a recommendation and is looking for input. And, you know, whether they take it or not, whether they bring it early enough in the process, you know, those are, I think, the things that have frustrated other EAB members previously, or if we're just sort of you know, learning about these things and providing some input. But I guess for me, it's harder to, well, I agree with the theory. I think the way it's been set up, it's harder for us to provide value in that way.
Each issue is a little different, and municipalization is a uniquely dynamic issue in this particular way, and maybe not one that's common as others are. And I want to maybe suggest that since we do have that Excel agreement on the agenda to talk about here in just a second, but I think that what we're really talking about is the bigger picture of how EAB relates and is weighing in on these different types of issues. And I don't think I want to emphasize this one anymore, except but I do want to point your attention to one last document that was in the packet, which is just, again, more background on the thoughts of the sort of previous iteration of the EAB, which is the summary of the letter to council from last year. And so just to note that there were 6 issues that were identified. The pesticide issue, the urban heat island issue, stormwater management study, native plant strategy, air quality, and soil conservation. So, and I would note that 3 of these issues were significantly moved forward in this past year. Those being, we worked very hard on the local pesticide ordinance, and it was going to be in legislature before COVID hit. So it's unfortunate that happened. There's been a lot of work done on the native planting strategy, and then a lot of work on soil conservation. The other 3, I think the board did a lot of great work around urban heat and starting the discussion around air quality. And I don't think we really got very much into the material around stormwater. So I just want to put that out just so that as you're thinking about where we go forward, just to look at what we were thinking about in the past. So
I'd also like to add, though, that we as a board, all of us are focused on the climate emergency, and this isn't something that we are ignoring in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam.
We do feel like the city is spending an enormous amount of resources in trying to address how the city of Boulder can do better and improve the situation for the city of Boulder and beyond. They're involved, you know, in discussions with other cities and states and in a lot of places. And so there's only so much that we as a board can do that is not already being done by the city staff already.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam, very much for emphasizing that. Which isn't to say, Susan, at all that we don't need to keep making the point that we're in a climate emergency and that we need to think about things differently. So I think, you know, we welcome that continued emphasis. So at this point, what I'd like to do is turn this section of the meeting back over to your board chair, Justin, to go through this set of topics that are listed in the agenda for this evening, and also to have the presentation from Miriam. And then around 7:15 or so, I'd like to maybe come back and we'll just kind of do a wrap up of this kind of broader set of prioritizing issues. And we'll think about how to close that up for this session. So Justin?
Okay, I don't know. I guess, are you providing an update on what council did related to prairie dogs, or is that someone else?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, did anybody have a chance to tune into the meeting last night? Oh, well, I don't blame you. We weren't on the agenda until, or we didn't get on the topic until I think 9:30. And then council literally discussed that topic for 3 hours before they finally at 12:45 came to a vote. And so to make a long story short, the council voted 8-1 to endorse without qualification the preferred alternative that's laid out by OSBT and staff to allow for lethal control in the project area on irrigated agricultural lands in just that particular project area, to allow for borough disturbance with a very prescribed set of criteria, and to basically initiate a process of starting to gather data that can be used as a baseline to understand how these treatments are going to change the character of the landscape. So it's actually a pretty watershed moment in OSBT's history. There was a lot that led up to that over the last 2 weeks between when the council first had the public comments and when they deliberated again, including an incident that some of you may have heard of, in which county prairie dog lethal control equipment was vandalized to the tune of about $100,000 worth of damage. And then a lot of social media that actually started to kind of profile the legitimacy of vandalism and destruction as a legitimate response to this whole situation. So it's been pretty tense around all this, but even despite all that, council made a very definitive statement. So one of the proposals that was made by the prairie dog advocates was to sunset the lethal control authorizations at the end of 2022, and council rejected that. So they did, however, implement or they endorsed a staff proposal that there will be an annual review of all the actions taking place and a sort of description of the plans for each year going forward, including the rationale for using whatever treatments are being used. And then the last thing I wanted to note, because I think it could actually be something that EAB is invited in some ways to relate to, there was a proposal that a collaborative learning or shared learning process be initiated that would bring together representatives from all the different stakeholder groups with the city to work on specific parcels and explore a range of different types of alternative treatments and implement monitoring to observe the effects of that as a way of trying to build community knowledge and understanding about what the most effective approaches to land restoration and recovery can be. And so I think there wasn't a firm or formal request that staff do that, but there was a very strong signal from council that they wanted to see that happen. There have been some discussions already about the possibility that something like the Center for Sustainable Landscapes and Communities at CU, Sharon Collins group, might become a third-party convener for something like that. So I'm actually really excited about that as a possibility. I've seen that kind of cross-stakeholder collaborative learning process be a real game changer for very polarized conflicts and other resource management situations. And the thing I wanted to convey to you is that during this whole last couple of weeks of trying to negotiate through this to the council session, I did have conversations with a number of OSBT members, and they were very adamant that they have appreciated and they want EAB to be actively involved in this issue of soils and land recovery, and view you as a very legitimate and important partner in that process. So far from them saying, this is our domain, you guys stay out of it, they were exactly the opposite. Like, thank you for being an active part of this. We want you to continue to be an active part of that. So, and again, I think that reflects on the fact that you've been saying for the last several years, this is an issue, we think it's an important issue, and we have an opinion about that. So. Any questions about that I could answer around that topic?
I don't have any questions, but I just think it's exciting to see like a decision made, and after all this time, and one that we, weighed in on in the direction it went. I think it's pretty cool. Glad to see it.
Yeah, and by the way, sort of Susan, again, back to your points, council was watching for what EAB said on this issue. I heard at least one council member say, did EAB have a chance to comment? Yes, it's in the memo. Okay, so. Yeah. One other thing, Mike, you might be interested to know is that, so we do now have a new position that just about a year old in the city, the soil health coordinator. Her name's Lauren Kolb, fantastic PhD in soil stuff.
Yeah, I went to grad school with her. I know her really well.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's right.
Yeah.
So she has been out gathering a lot of field data on soils this season, but she was not gathering data in a lot of those contested prairie dog areas because we didn't know how the policy was going to go, and we didn't want to be putting a lot of time and effort in places that we weren't going to be able to have an effect. Council was really clear, and especially Sam Weaver said over and over again, I want to see you guys gathering baseline data on all the sites that we're treating. So I think that there's a real interesting opportunity for some significant learning, both as sort of community science, but also broader science as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and she's fantastic. So I think it's really encouraging. It's really cool. Yeah, I'm excited about it.
That's all I had, Justin, on that.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Brett or comments? Well, then it looks like the Excel settlement process and council deliberations are up next. This is another just you bring everyone up to speed on where we are, Brett. I don't believe there's anything, I mean, it's on the ballot at this point, right?
Well, I think more I wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to feel like you completed the conversation that you started last month. I think it was getting late and people were feeling a little anxious about not being able to reach a kind of consensus decision. So I want to make sure there was plenty of room for any further discussion about this. There has been those further developments. Council last night did refer this to the ballot. So I think that's another important development. That does mean that it's whatever, September the 2nd. That's not going to happen until November. It could be that you guys might want to decide whether you want to have staff come back to do any further presentation or clarification about the settlement, or whether there's any further discussion that you all want to have about whether the board wants to take a position about this ahead of that, et cetera.
How does the actual language and who crafts the language for the ballot, and how does it craft? What's that? I'm just curious. You don't have to spend a lot of time explaining it to me, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the city attorney drafts the language for that. And my guess is that's probably in the enormous packet that council had last night. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of text in that because it covers a lot of different aspects of the franchise and a whole bunch of different pieces in there.
Okay.
Brett, I would imagine that the city has done the kind of analysis that Susan was interested in about what are the environmental impacts, specifically the CO2 impacts of going forward with the municipality versus not, or versus going the route that they're proposing at this point. I mean, is that information available to us?
That's a really good question. Heidi, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Could you repeat the question?
So I would imagine the city has done an analysis of what is the difference in the CO2 impacts that we will see, whether we go with the municipality versus not going with the municipalization.
Right. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some team members. Matt Lehrman is probably the one to speak with on that specific question. One thing to note, Brett, I was just about to send a note to you, is that since council put the franchise on the ballot last night, we are in what's called a going dark period. And so what that means is staff can only provide certain factual information to the community. And so we would need to, so depending on what the board is interested in, we would need to talk to our attorneys about what we can and cannot do. And at this point, it's really just, you know, answering questions. And Miriam, I'm sorry I don't have the specific answer to your question, but that's something that I can bring back to our team and see if they can provide a response to you.
yeah.
Sure, and Susan, I think you can just talk.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No need to raise your hand.
Susan, you're somehow, let's see, we can't hear you, Susan.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I participated in a meeting with city staff and a group of concerned citizens on Friday. It included Matt Lehrman and Jonathan and Steve Katnack, and Tom Carr wasn't there, but the other attorney whose name I can't remember, and where we were asking for some of that information. So, because essentially what the franchise agreement does is guarantee that Excel will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions relative to 2005 by 80%, which, by the way, is required by Colorado state law, so we're not really getting anything extra there. And what the Boulder goal is that we get to 100% renewable energy by 2030. So, you know, the question was, from a greenhouse gas impact standpoint, what's the difference between 100% renewable energy and an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases? And they weren't able to give us that information, but we did ask that, anticipating that there would be a blackout period as of today, that we would want to get access to data, and they did say they could give us data, they just can't comment on it or share studies with us.
Yeah. So
and by the way, there are two items on the ballot. One is the franchise agreement, and one is the utility occupation tax, which basically goes away if we approve the franchise agreement.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think, as you say, I think that staff was under the sort of direction to try to put together some response based on the questions that came out Friday. So that's something that we could certainly share with this board. So one thing I would like to offer as something to think about with this issue is a theme that we raised last year in July when we went to council with basically the climate emergency declaration and the statement that our current climate action plan was in no way sufficient to address that emergency. And that was that we needed to think about and evaluate all of our city climate related actions from the perspective of how it responded to two questions. does the action that we are either doing or contemplating result in systems level change? And is that action scalable and replicable to other places? Because clearly, as we know at this point, with something like maybe 10 years to change the direction of the global context, doing something that might be really fantastic for something local, for example, but isn't really going to change a system and isn't likely to be replicable in other places, might be something that we have to think about and decide whether it's still really a climate related action in terms of intending to have an effect on global climate change, or whether it's something that we're choosing to do for other reasons because it might generate a lot of local benefits, but isn't really necessarily about trying to change climate systems. Because, and I think, so one argument that has been made, and I think there's some relatively persuasive evidence is that continuing to pursue municipalization, assuming that it's going to be something that many other places pursue, hasn't proven to be true. And so it doesn't necessarily look like it's a scalable solution. And in terms of changing the system, does our being able to achieve a certain level of emissions reduction locally change how Excel or the larger system does business? And so I think those are the questions that might be useful to think about as you're looking at whatever solutions are being proposed, not only in this case, but in others as well.
I'd just add, Brett, also, I feel like, something to consider on that scalable front is that, municipalities or cities and towns aren't exactly going to have booming budgets in the next few years, given the current situation. So yeah, that's just something when you said scalable, that's just something that comes to mind, like, money that might have been there might not be there anymore for a lot of places.
Right. Yeah.
Just if I can throw a point out, and this is something that's maybe technical, perhaps it's beyond what an EAB could discuss in a quantitative manner, but I want to come back to Susan's point. The language of the settlement process and the options that exist are two different metrics whose intercomparability is not obvious. So to say that we will have 100% renewable energy is not the same as saying we won't be emitting CO2. Renewable energy requires CO2 and it requires baseload. So there's lots of details underneath what 100% renewable means. It doesn't mean you don't emit CO2. And 80% reduction in CO2 emissions, which actually I would prefer because it is a little bit more of a hard metric, but doesn't address methane. So it needs to be generalized. For example, you can replace coal with natural gas and get a substantial reduction in your CO2 emissions, but if you don't regulate the methane, CH4, your greenhouse gas forcing can actually increase. So this is really important to know how these are measured and what they include and exclude in terms of the enforcement of the environmental degradation that's implicit underneath these numbers that we read about. It's way beyond what the average public person, this is why I think we all had some concerns about how the public can actually cut their way through this and make sense of choice A and choice B and what it means. These metrics are complicated and they're different and they're difficult to intercompare.
Great point, Marty.
Thanks for bringing it up, Susan.
Yeah, and I think.
Yeah, but it's not just the public, it's council too. And I'm afraid they're not really understanding those underlying issues that you just brought up. So maybe it's part of our function is to educate them on that.
Yeah, I mean, just changing 80% reduction in CO2 emissions to 80% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions is a major change in the language.
And that actually was something, I think this is, I'm not trying to advocate here, but I am trying to point out that part of what the city used its municipalization effort as was leverage to negotiate with Excel around, and that is, at least as I understand it, in the last week ahead of the release of the settlement, Excel attempted to try to hold it to CO2, and we said we won't sign unless it's CO2e, unless it's GHGs. And so it's my understanding that that is the concession that we won, and that it is actually sort of emblematic of this figuring out how to create systems change versus just sort of local change that we potentially are exerting across the entire system. Because in the state legislation, it doesn't say CO2e. I think it just says CO2.
I think so, and that's really important. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all good points, but I mean, at this point, this issue is before the voters. I mean, I don't see what role we can have in the next 2 months, honestly, or should have. I mean, I don't feel comfortable as a board weighing in on an issue that's, before the voters. We're all free in our, if we want to bring staff in to learn more in our role as private citizens, I guess we'd have to talk about what the sort of ethical, or how are we allowed to do that, or could we turn an EAB meeting into a way to learn more about this process to help educate us and open it up to the public, and the public if they're interested. But it seems like at this point this isn't an issue that I'd feel comfortable weighing in on as a board, or really learning more about in the next few months. It seems like it's sort of out of our hands.
Yeah, and I think as Heidi's rightly pointed out, I don't think we actually could call for staff to present based on the sort of go dark period.
Ship has sailed.
I guess what I keep coming back to is this issue impacts almost 50% of our greenhouse gas production, right? 48%, something like 48% of our greenhouse gas comes from the way we produce electricity. So it just seems like it ought to be central to our concerns.
I think as a private citizen, I work every day on this issue, so I'm very concerned about it. But as EAB, I mean, I think we should be concerned about it moving forward. But at this point, it's moved beyond any way that we have to influence it.
And I think I would just note that EAB will have a not dissimilar context to consider post November 4th that the city organization and particularly our department, Climate Initiatives, will have, which is like, now what? Now that whatever's happened has happened, what is our strategy now? And so I think that the issue is not, I mean, Excel as the settlement issue and how we proceed there will be whatever it is. But as you're saying, Susan, the issue will still remain, and we'll still need to figure out what the next steps are to try to have.
Yeah, and that's why I put it on one of my virtual sticky notes. I mean, I think once we know one way or another what's going on, then I think it would be valid to pick up again and try to figure out what the board's role in it, whether it's implementing the franchise agreement, which has a number of public process and input steps or components to it, or it's, I guess, trying, if it fails, figuring out what the hell the city's going to do next.
Yeah, I agree, Justin. I think that's good logic.
Worth knowing there's a multiplier effect on the settlement process through the transportation. So it's true, maybe half of our CO2 emissions is related to our electricity, but we're electrifying transportation at a very rapid speed. And so you want that transportation electrification coming off of renewable electricity, not off of other. And so there's really a multiplying effect that needs to be made clear to people here, that just buying an electric car and putting it onto a grid that is non-renewable isn't really solving many problems at the end of the day. So this is much more than just the electrification for electricity production, but for the whole movement of society, ultimately.
Yeah, because an electric car uses about half as much as what your house uses. So
yeah.
If everybody has 2 electric cars in their garage, we just doubled our electricity production and we doubled our greenhouse gas impact.
But the only thing I would just say again is, what will move the entire system? That's what we have to be thinking about. What will move the entire system? Because if we don't move the entire system, our moving our little piece of it will be nice, but in terms of a global impact, it won't be that significant, obviously.
Storage.
Yeah, and I think the state policy related to this, as well as the lifting of the net metering cap commitment, is probably more important than will lead to greater reductions in greenhouse gas emissions than whatever the city of Boulder can muster.
Well, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to review or to listen to the presentation that Miriam has spent time preparing for us tonight. So, Justin, I'm sorry I sort of intervened.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Any last comments folks want to make, or should we move on?
We should move on.
So Miriam, I think it's to you.
All right, I'm gonna try to share my screen and you guys let me know if you can see what I see.
Miriam, just earlier you were your voice was like cutting in and cutting out, so I don't know if there's something on your end you can do to make it
Might be
a little
just
easier to hear you.
Stay leaning
I think it's
forward.
proximity to my computer. My aunts and uncles always tell me they can't hear me when I do Zoom calls, so I'll try to be closer. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. I don't think that I exactly addressed the topic that Brett posted, but what I basically looked at was how do we protect air quality and public health during wildfires, because that was very present in my mind when this was all going forward. And it definitely was a public health emergency, really. I mean, we had enormous measurements of PM10, and the ozone has been going insane over the last few weeks. So it's timely that we should be looking at this. And basically what I'm going to go through is just showing you guys, information that I've tried to gather and point out examples of what other cities are doing, and things that we could propose for the city of Boulder to do that would be more proactive and helpful for the citizens in our city. That's my intent anyway. Okay, so I don't know. There we go. So yeah, I was gonna just go quickly through what's currently available to Boulder residents, then go through some examples, and then there have been several presentations that have been available through the Air and Waste Management Association, enormous amounts of information coming through about the wildfires in California and how California is dealing with this very tough issue. And this was even before the fires that happened this year. So these are all papers that were done because of the Camp Fire that happened, or I think that's the right fire name, a year or so ago. And then just pulling together a few different topics for information resources that would be useful, things that would be useful to use and present to the citizens that could be helpful for them. So for Boulder's current information availability, if you type in City of Boulder and air quality, the only thing that comes up is Boulder County air quality. And the county's website is not horrible, but it does not address what is happening currently, and no real-time information. It doesn't give you the AQI. It doesn't say we are having an air quality situation that needs to be dealt with right now. You need to protect yourself. And that to me is astounding. Like people need to be able to have that information, and they need to know that they need to protect themselves. So I put some links in here. I'm gonna try to switch back and forth to the internet, and let's see if I can do that. So this is what you see can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Did it switch? Okay. This is what you see when you go to the City of Boulder, or the Boulder County website. They do give you an air quality action day, sort of what you need to do if it's an air quality action day, but they don't tell you that it is.
Miriam, it didn't switch screens.
It did not. Okay. See, that was what I was worried about. Okay. All right. Let's see there. There. Now you guys can see.
Yeah.
It talks to the air quality action days, but doesn't tell you what it is. If you do click on this, it does take you to CDPHE's website. You can see that now, right?
Yep.
Which gives you much more information. It tells you right here whether it's an air quality action day, if you have high impacts that you need to be concerned with. It does give you more information. This is the bulk of the information, and I'm going to go there. Actually, let's go back to this screen. This is hard, see? It brings you to the air quality advisory there. When I went there during the wildfire events, the impacts were huge. They were very high. There was a special advisory that provided a further link about how to protect yourself, what you can do as a citizen to protect yourself, and it was important information. It gave you a forecast. It gave you for what the air quality might be in the next few days. Also important information, stay inside, keep your air conditioning on if you can, you know, that kind of information.
Mary, it struck me when we had the event this summer recently that a site like the COVID site that we have for Boulder County, which is very informative, real time, tells you how many people are getting sick and who's in a hospital and so
right.
It would have been useful to have that as a template. Maybe that's something to come back to as a very informative public health website for the COVID. Could be applied to the air quality.
Right, and the example I'm about to give you was Fort Collins, who is actually doing something like that. And if you go to their website, they have a immediate update on what's happening with the fire right near them, and how to connect to the incident management, and how to protect yourself from smoke impacts at this link, and get updated fire information and alerts. You can sign up for these things through their website. It was really quite astounding. And very helpful and informative. And this is something that is not very hard for the city of Boulder to do for the citizens. I would highly recommend, if nothing else, we just advocate for improving the website and putting something up that is useful and helpful.
Is that a recommendation that would go to council, by the way, or where do you see that? Who needs to hear that from us?
Yeah,
don't know.
Marty, I was just thinking about that. I think that, again, we're in a bit of new territory. I'm going to do some research on this, but I do think it's something that probably should go both to the city manager's office and to council. But let me figure out what the right channeling of this is. I was going to say this at the end, but Miriam, I think this is such fantastic information. And I want to think about how we bundle it together with maybe a concise recommendation statement, perhaps from the EAB as a whole, so that I could then figure out how to do that presentation. So, yeah.
Okay. So one thing that, sorry, my phone is ringing right behind us. Another presentation that I got to attend was Megan DeMasters from the city of Fort Collins gave a presentation to the Air and Waste Management Association for a lunchtime presentation. And they are specifically focusing on smoke impact management in the city up there. And I thought it was very interesting and something that we could also, you know, look at. I mean, she gave me full rights to present her information to you guys at this point. So why do they focus on smoke impacts? Because it travels, it varies all the time depending on, you know, wind direction and heat and everything else. There's different sizes of events, and the particulate creates really highly hazardous air quality conditions. It's something that needs to be addressed. She brings up, you know, what is a smoke-ready community? It's one where public buildings have the filtration that they need to get rid of the smoke if it's coming into the building. Community members need to understand the health risks that are potentially associated with the smoke exposure. And then they need to have access to the tools to protect themselves. And then what Fort Collins is focused on is to make sure that the most at-risk and underserved members of the community are being addressed, that the resources are available to those people.
I heard some talking about each home should have a smoke-safe room, basically a sanctuary room.
Right. I mean, we personally in my house, we changed our filter in our air conditioner. We, you know, I mean, not everybody knows that that's something that you need to be doing.
And it's,
You know?
it's an interesting challenge because here you've got air conditioners running off of coal energy, emitting CO2. Every home has an air conditioner, have a safe room. That's why the speed of moving to renewable is so important. So you can have safe rooms that aren't also destroying the environment through the emissions of greenhouse gases.
Right. What percentage of houses in Boulder actually have solar panels? I would venture to say it's fairly large. But that's a different conversation. Smoke impact management. What is Fort Collins doing? They're collaborating with partners. They're putting together a wildfire smoke campaign, and they're considering equity. They're putting together plans associated with emergency response and community scale monitoring, which I think is a super interesting potential. For long term, they're looking at building upgrades and again, looking at their most underserved population. So the idea of developing a particle monitoring plan is really interesting. It will help the city understand where the impacts are and how to protect people more readily. It gives a better representation of spatial and temporal variability in the smoke. It promotes the public awareness. It informs the responders. It's a citizens science-based program. You'll see that the monitors that they're proposing, they're super low cost. People can put them in next to their houses. They can put them in their houses to see what the particulate levels are in the house. It just helps people understand what exactly is happening. The other example that I brought up here is the city of Denver, and they haven't specifically addressed the wildfire smoke problem, but they are implementing a very robust monitoring program to help protect the air quality associated with their, oh, sorry, Lynn. Oh. Am I supposed to take comments from Lynn at this point?
No, you're not.
No, okay. So City of Denver is implementing, you know, this very robust air quality monitoring plan. They're doing it around the schools. They're implementing it sort of an educational component to it so that the kids coming through the schools understand what's going on here and can take part in the solution for themselves. It's really an interesting program, and I would really recommend that you see what the city of Denver is doing as far as their monitoring program. I know that they have a website that's accessible and easy to read. It gives you minute by minute air quality information from their monitors that everyone can access. They're talking about, or they just put out an RFP to create a phone app so that people can put this information on their phones and have immediate access to it. I just love it. I think it's really interesting. They have a link on their page on what you can do to improve your air quality in the area. And I mean, just giving people information will help them make the change that they can make to make the air quality better. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I guess I really like what, I mean, Denver's doing. I know they came and talked at a previous EAB meeting. And so,
Yeah.
you know, school started recently, and the principal put out a, video message about, welcome back to school. And I guess he just had a really interesting comment to me, which, it was mostly about COVID and how we're dealing with this new reality. But he's like, in a normal year, the biggest decision I'd be facing right now is whether to let the kids outside to, play because of the air quality. This was a couple of weeks ago and it was pretty bad. And like, but he doesn't have any information that's local to, anywhere near where my kid goes to school about what the air quality actually is. So
Exactly.
seems like such an elegant program, targeting kids and vulnerable people that have sort of monitoring it, in those locations.
Right. I mean, and we actually, I know that at Casey, I believe it's Casey, there's one science teacher there that is actually doing it. She has educational tools, and she's bringing her kids into, how to learn about how to measure, how to read, the information that she can access. So it's not rocket science. It's like, it's something that's very accessible and easy to learn about, that I think is very useful.
Marion, not to throw you off track, but real quick, do you have any information on how many more respiratory situations occurred that brought people into emergency rooms or doctors' offices, hospitals?
So on the City of Denver's website, they talk about that a little bit. No, they don't actually. They don't actually give you the data, and no, I don't have those numbers specifically. But that is information that's accessible and that can be found, certainly. So the next topic I was going to go to is the impacts from wildfire and preparedness, prevention, and response that the Bay Area is basically doing. And this was, as I said, from a presentation that was given before the last round of great big fires that were happening in California. And I thought some of these ideas were, really interesting ideas that can be used and presented to the city, and things that we can do as a city to promote more action, I think. So for instance, they have grants and incentives that help people pay for lost homes and rebuild, to encourage building with energy efficient homes and that reduce the climate impacts, right? I think that, and we haven't, there were fires nearby Boulder, in Sunshine Canyon, where, people lost their homes. And was there rebuilding? Was there any incentive associated with that? I don't know.
Miriam, you're going to have to speak closer again. You're cutting in.
Sorry. Okay. And then grant development associated with establishing clean air centers across the region, where people can go and be safe, and how they're taking care of their lungs, basically. They build up partnerships and regional alliances. And, I looked at, the RAC that is local to our community, the Regional Air Quality Council, and they had nothing on wildfires and smoke management. It's just astounding to me that there is nothing that is being done, even on a state or regional level, that should be addressing these kinds of things. We get wildfires in the state consistently with the drought conditions that we have. It is definitely something that needs to be looked at. Community information and resources. This is just stuff that, tools that they've provided to their citizens that help them understand what they can do to protect themselves better. They have a regional toolkit that allows people to understand what they can do. I just thought that was, stuff. There's lots of information out there that can be shared, and if we can encourage the city to make that more accessible to the citizens, I think we've done a good thing. So I was going to go into other informational tools and ideas, just briefly, just a few things. These portable air cleaners are things that were brought up recently in all of the wildfire smoke in California. And it's just these things that you can buy one, you can build one yourself. It's basically a filter in your house that helps you reduce the smoky air in the house. This is a do-it-yourself air cleaner, which I thought was really funny. It's from Maricopa County, and it just helps people build it themselves. tape it together, you know, and it just helps with the air cleaning. It's a great idea. The next thing I was going to bring up was the low-cost air quality monitors. There's these purple air sensors, and they're really inexpensive. They measure PM10, PM2.5, all of the particulate that get into our lungs and make us very sick. And it's not EPA standard measurements, but it's good enough to really get a good understanding of what is out there and whether we need to protect ourselves. The greatest thing about the purple air monitors is that they have this website that if you have a monitor, you implement a monitor at your house. And I'm going to go to the other screen and show you this. Sorry. Now I can't see what I'm doing. That's the filter. This is the purple air monitors, and you click on this data, and here's California over here. They're still having really high concentrations, and it gives you a minute-by-minute average of what's happening. It tells you what kind of air quality it is and what you need to be doing. Be careful, right? And when I was first looking at this in Colorado, we were having fairly high concentrations over here. Let's see, where is that? That's Utah.
Marian, how long are some of those time series?
They're minute by minute.
Yeah, I know. I mean, back in like 10 years, 20 years?
You know, I'm not sure how long it goes back.
Yeah.
I don't know how available that data is. That would be something that you could learn from, you know, probably when you buy a purple air sensor, they would tell you that.
You know, one of the things that can be very useful, especially in speaking to maybe it's council or whoever needs to know, if we can characterize the event that we experienced in Boulder this summer and say, hey, this is the worst event in 20 years of data. We don't know. Maybe it's 100 years of data if we had it. But can the EAB make a statement and say what we experienced in the summer of 2020 in Boulder County ranks the worst over a certain period of time?
Well, I would imagine that CDPHE is doing that. I mean, they have monitors that are measuring this as well. And
So, but I think that Marty's point is, could we get that data to be able to make some statement? Everybody knows it was bad, but how do we put a reference point to that historically?
I'm sure that that's accessible. I'm sure that we can get the data from the monitors that CDPHE is using. I don't know about the purple air monitors. I don't know how accessible that is.
And let me take it one step further real quick. Could we then say that let's just say that for the sake of argument, it was the worst in 25 years of available data. Are we then able to also say that the reason it was so bad was A, fires on the West Slope, B, fires in Fort Collins area, C, the heat wave, right? The stagnant air that existed that didn't mix the smoke away from the area, but kept it in the area circulating for an inordinate number of weeks. Because then it gets into different aspects of attribution and likelihood of recurring behavior of this environmental catastrophe. Really, for some people, it was catastrophic. It was as bad concerns as the COVID was.
Yeah, I was going to say, Marty, I think strategically, it's interesting. You guys did some really good work on the urban heat island efforts, but we weren't able to really get as much traction as we wanted, in part because there wasn't an event that had really made that dynamic very personal. Whereas this smoke piece is a very tangible, personal experience. Although I would say also one of the things that probably a lot of people were noticing was how hot this summer was. But I was just thinking that we probably can use the air quality issue as a bridge to start talking about heat in a way that's even more persuasive, like you said.
Right. And there are many other tools that are coming from NOAA and NCAR as well that I'm going to show you here as well. So this is just a brief on the sensors. And as you can see, they're really low cost. Like you can get one for just a couple $100 and put it outside, and you have access to the data and information like right away. And this is a quantity purchase. I actually did this research for the city of Denver because he was looking at using these purple air monitors there. So this is really an interesting map. The fire and smoke map. This is an EPA website, and I'm gonna try to go there. Can you guys see that? There. It's initializing the map. And my location is Boulder, and when you click on this, it actually gives you what is the sensor telling you there. But if I zoom out, let's see if I can do that.
Again, stay close to your mic, Miriam.
What?
Stay close to your mic.
Okay, sorry.
This is like a network of cooperative observers that have these devices.
I know, but look at this.
Wow.
Yeah, this is showing you the fire. It's giving you information about the fire. It's giving you information about the air quality around that fire. Oh, I don't know why that just happened, sorry.
Is this the network of people that have the purple air sensors, or what am I looking
Yeah,
at?
every time you see something that says a low-cost sensor, that's purple air.
Huh.
They're all over California.
Wow, I like that. Really
Yeah.
cool.
Are you saying this is a
Like
federal site that's drawing in this private data?
Say that again, Brent, sorry.
Is this a federal site that's bringing in this private data?
So this is an EPA, fireairnow.gov. It's a EPA, I believe, program that is bringing in this, and it says the sensor data plot it's a pilot that adds a new layer of air quality data from the low-cost sensors, and then it has a caveat associated with it.
Wow, interesting.
Isn't that cool?
So they're aggregating that publicly available private data.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, there's a lot of back and forth with this. Okay.
So I do want to do a time check, Miriam, also.
Okay, I'm just gonna I've got two more things to show you. This one is from NOAA, and it's an experimental smoke model, and this is what it produces. So when I did a screenshot when I opened this one up, and it shows you where the fire and smoke is traveling. So you can actually see, like, in real time what's happening, and then it's also giving you forecasts. Again, experimental, so I don't know how much we can use it. And then this I learned from again doing research for the Denver group. These guys are doing forecasting of air quality conditions for the Front Range. See, this is a contract with CDPHE, so they're actually giving you forecasts for what the air quality is going to be like in the next few days through this website. And it's all different pollutants, PM 2.5, ozone. There's a whole bunch of different, there's a drawdown here that gives you a lot of different options. So these are the resources that I found, you know, just doing a pretty quick search. There's tons of stuff out there. Oh, sorry. Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can't see anything. Oh, there. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing and we can just discuss.
Very nice, Miriam. Thank you. That was great.
Okay.
So I would just note, by the way, that one of the things that always gets Boulder's attention is when Fort Collins does something better or new.
Yeah. Sorry.
It seemed like Longmont was doing it better than us. We don't have to go all the way to Fort Collins to get shown up for the air quality.
No, the other thing that I found interesting about Fort Collins is not only do they have an entire group focused on air quality in their city program, they have an advisory board focused on air quality.
Well,
Well, I think it may be because Fort Collins has had more smoke impacts in the last decade or so that they've taken this a little bit further. But I think what you've put together, Miriam, is a very compelling case for why we have to start taking this more seriously. I guess what I'd like to think with all of you about is how do we put this together in a somewhat concise document and statement, because it's just sending the deck of slides won't necessarily do it, obviously. So thoughts and comments about how we could put this together so that I could figure out how to then get it to the city.
So I can try to craft something, that's much more concise and just bullet points and bits of information. And then if you guys want to just add on to it based on what I put together, then that's fine.
And I think maybe what we could do is I'll do a little bit of thinking and checking about how we then take it to the city and what pathways. And perhaps we put this on the agenda for next meeting, Justin, and that maybe at that point the board could do some kind of a formal statement or recommendation or something that you would sort of attach to this report that could then go probably both to council and to staff.
Yeah, it seems reasonable. It seems like it would be great if we could have some sort of draft of something to discuss at the next meeting to try to move it forward. I mean, it seems like, just saying we feel it's important that Boulder do something, and here's a couple examples of, relatively easy to, sort of the minimum level of effort is just collect some information and get it out to the public in a user-friendly way.
Yeah.
So just a thought on this. We've got 2 of our 6 sort of priority items from the details of what we were recommending. I guess I should say what we were suggesting to council for our 2021 activities. Air quality and heat really are both captured. A storyboard would be wonderful. I mean, less words and more images. Where you almost have a movie that takes us through the summer of 2020. It takes us through the beginning of it where we were all, clean air and we had a very snowy winter and spring. And then all of a sudden, the fires and the heat really starts in late July. And all of a sudden the fires begin. And to create a narrative, a story that's visual, would be much more impactful than a bullet list. I mean, I love what you had, Marion. Many resources, very practical. But if we want to catch the attention of the public and maybe even the council, turning it into a storyboard that is visual. And you may be familiar with storyboards that go through animations with only limited language that takes a person through a narration of what was just experienced.
Right. I think it's useful to talk about what was just experienced to give to help them understand, how we can make an impact because of the current situation. But I think it's also helpful to bring up ideas about simple things that can be done that will have a major impact, that will do something useful.
So both. I mean, I guess if you can create the excitement, if I can use that word, excitement isn't quite the recognition of what just happened in a visual sense. That's compelling.
Sure. Marty, would you like to put something like that together?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Since I opened my mouth, obviously, and I'm hoping that there's some skill sets either within that we could advise, whether they're staff or other people who are so inclined to do things like this, that we can advise, maybe find the content material for them, find the images that can be created and provide a short, pithy language that transitions from one image to another that takes us through the summer of 2020.
There is no staff that will do that for us. Am I right, Brent?
Well, let's not go to what resources are available yet. Let's talk about what the right strategy would be. And I think Miriam, you've done a fantastic job of starting to build the informational foundation. And Marty's now talking about a kind of presentational aspect of this. And then I think there's a sort of frankly a political aspect. Like then how does all that get included. But so Marty, I think this is a great idea. I think the first step is finish the process of compiling information. And Miriam, I think you've committed to doing that first step, right? To then hand off. And Marty, I would be happy to think with you about the presentational aspects and maybe for you to identify some what you think of as really good examples of that. And that maybe even you and I could start as a draft for the board, putting together this kind of storyboard that you were just laying out. I was taking some notes. I thought they were really fantastic. And then we have things to discuss, which I need to do some research for you about, which is like, well, then what do we do with this once we get this fantastic thing? So
finding certain images, I won't worry whether they're public domain yet or not. But you know, some of this you can create on an Apple movie, honestly. All right, you just put nice images in. You can set it to music, right? You know, Earth, Wind, and Fire if you want to really get the right band behind this thing, and you know, you could really make a big impact. You know, you start that, and then you go into, okay, now here's your resources. Here's what you could do to prevent this from affecting the health of our community. Wonderful. First, you inspire them with their eyes.
As somebody who's almost 60, I can say this without worrying that I'm going to be charged as kind of ageist, but I think that Marty's demonstrating that old dogs can learn some new tricks here. So, so Marty, I think I'm up with you here on this. I think that the idea of creating more compelling presentation stuff is really key on a lot of levels, on a lot of topics. And so I'm with you to start exploring that. Marty, the other thing though, I do want to put in your bucket, maybe this is something, Mike, that you would also, but others, we do need to make this connection to climate change. So it's not just about how we had a bad summer and we should be worried about others. It's like, this is going to happen. It's going to get worse. It's going to compound other issues like urban heat. And we need to be using this as a bridge, I think, to also be talking about how we need to be managing urban heat also. So, and Marty, you're uniquely well positioned because of who you work for, I think, to help us make that case too. Susan. You're muted, Susan.
Sorry about that. It was a great presentation, Miriam. Thank you. I was also hoping to learn more about like what are the key causes of the demise of our air quality, and what can we do to bring down the root cause in addition to working on dealing with the end effects.
Was specifically around the wildfire and the particulate associated with that. But, I mean, we can talk about ozone on a different aspect as well.
I mean, there's certainly our energy systems are creating a very high background level of air pollutants. There's no question about that. That we need to be pointing out and raising that up. And it's interesting how we've sort of lost touch with, or we haven't talked much about local air quality issues caused by our energy systems that much. It's been so much about GHGs over the last few years. But I think we are in this unique new territory that we're going to face very significant air quality impacts because of wildfires now, probably very consistently going forward. So this is, again, I think this is fantastic work and really groundbreaking, I think, for both this board and for the city in terms of how you're bringing it forward. So let's take this as the next steps. We're amazing. I knew this time was going to fly by. Miriam's going to put something together. We could, Miriam, if you want to post a draft, we can create that sort of Google Doc that's publicly viewable that you can post into, so that maybe there's even something posted that people can look at ahead of the next meeting if people want to make comments or additions there, that we could bring that forward to be discussed and perhaps brought into some sort of near final form after next meeting. And then Marty, you and I and whoever else, hopefully others too, would be interested, can start thinking about how we put that into a presentation format. Great.
Sounds great.
Well, good. So if we go back to the agenda here, I did want to, we're basically there. I wanted to take one last look at the mural board. We did have one more topic here, which was an update on the Greenways Advisory Committee. Maybe we could do that right now, if you don't mind. just to see if there's anything that Mike wants to throw in about that topic before we do
Yeah,
that.
I'm happy to do that. Actually, so that meeting was actually really great. It ended up running long, but we had some really good discussions. And ultimately, you know, the plan we were asked to review was basically the projects that are laid out over the next year, right? And whether, or, you know, in the future, and whether or not we agreed that they were good projects. And there was unanimous like buy-in from everyone that like the plan itself was great. And we issued a statement saying that we were supported the plan, but we also drafted a couple of suggestions for them after a really good conversation with staff and everyone. And those were basically that, you know, we agree that the master's plan is great, we go forward, but we also said that we got into this long discussion about the interdepartmental, like departmental nature of the Greenways program, and that there's all these programs contributing, but there isn't really anyone in charge. And there was sort of, like I brought up some things and some other people brought up some issues around things that was like, oh, well, who's in charge of that? I've noticed changes in these things on our greenways over the last year. You know, we talked about like the amount of litter or things like that, or erosion. And people were like, well, there's not really anyone. So it kind of gets muddled. And so we made a recommendation that we support the plan, but that, and I'm just looking at my notes, that we recommended that they rehire the former position of the Greenways coordinator that was eliminated in 2018 to sort of tie all these departments together. And then we also spent some time talking about the funding of the Greenways program. And the funding's, you know, it's 28% the transportation fund, stormwater and flood management fund is 28%, and the lottery fund is 44%. And so then we talked about how like, there's other departments that have tie-ins to greenways, like open space and parks and recreation, et cetera, that don't actually contribute to the budget, it seems like. And so we also recommended that for all these people who are sort of influenced by the Greenways program and butt up against, that maybe there be consideration of having a more equal pitch in fiscally and seeking new funding resources to potentially expand the program and fill that position of the Greenways coordinator, and at least that be investigated moving forward. So that was really the takeaway and the suggestions we made, in addition to just supporting the plan. But it was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed it and learned quite a bit about Greenways that like hadn't actually been made. You know, I've been in a couple of those meetings now, and that hadn't really come out before. So I think it was actually a really informative meeting.
That's great, Mike. And what's the frequency of those meetings? Do you know?
You know, it doesn't. I think this is the third one I've been involved in, but you know, I'd have to look back at my calendar, but they seem to be pretty infrequent. Like every 6 to 8 months, it seems like we've had one or something like that. Maybe. But there was also, it seemed like a gap of a year where we didn't. So I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure if it's a regular cadence. It doesn't seem to be. But it was a good discussion and a good meeting. And and one other recommendation we made was that there's been, you know, we all unanimously agreed that it seems like over the last couple of years, there's like some really great spots in our greenways that have, where we've started to see like deterioration of whether it be stream banks or just overcrowding or insufficient trash disposal, things like that around high use areas. And that, you know, the Greenways committee, and if they do hire this new coordinator, should really look at some of these areas and make sure that the usage that the areas are seeing is still like aligned with the amount of resources being provided to them, because they're starting to, it seems like there's some disconnects, people felt like on the panel, between the amount, like certain areas are getting really high usage, but maybe they don't have the resources for that usage as it's picked up over the last few years and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mike, that kind of reminds me of last month's presentation regarding the Chautauqua area and how the use of that, obviously it's much more than a greenway, it's a park,
yeah.
A preserve, open space, but its uses have overwhelmed the resources. So, Mike, how would you compare the greenways that you learned about in your meeting in terms of scale and use and how it serves our community compared to what Chautauqua brings to our community?
You know, I think that's an interesting question. So I think, you know, Chautauqua is, I think they're both kind of hallmarks of like Boulder, right? Like, because you think about the greenways, they're all like the riparian paths and corridors, right? And like, you know, we started off the meeting saying like why we were interested in like participating in this role from another board. And I was saying that like, there's some of my favorite parts of Boulder, like riding along all these different creek paths with my daughter on our bikes and exploring them. And, you know, everyone kind of felt that way and that they're like a really interesting foundational part of Boulder. So similar to Chautauqua and in that aspect, they're kind of like something very unique and very great about Boulder, but they're just distributed out through everywhere. So you know, I think about how many times I go to Chautauqua a year, and then I think about how often I interact with the Greenways, right? And it's like Greenways are way more. So I think, but they're not like necessarily viewed as like as one great like monument to like open space, but there's something that people interact with, I think, more regularly. And so sometimes they get a little bit forgotten as it's just like riding down the sidewalk, but they get a little more taken for granted, I think, is maybe what I would say.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You know, just a quick point. Chautauqua is accessed increasingly by cars. It's so dismaying, you know, when you see all the cars backed up, not only up and down the street, you know, baseline, but into the park and then in the neighborhoods that go, you know, back toward town. It's probably, you know, 100 cars or more just for the folks who go there. Whereas the Greenways, I think people walk and bike there. I don't think there's much car used to get onto the Greenways system, is there?
There really isn't. And, you know, and if you look at the Greenways map, you know, they cut through every neighborhood in Boulder, like, or at least, you know, everyone's got one close to them. So I think whereas Chautauqua is just one spot, right? And so these are like a great network. So yeah, I think there's a lot to gain from having like like that position filled, the coordinator position filled, to sort of start thinking, you know, where all these resources intersect at the Greenways and how do we best, you know, make that work.
Do any Greenways actually intersect Chautauqua?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't know that I don't think any of the Greenway paths themselves actually do.
Not really.
Yeah. Yep.
No.
I can forward the map around. I was looking at it again. If everyone wants to see it, I can send it an email sometime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, terrific. Thank you, Mike. And Mike, do you feel comfortable continuing to serve as the EAB rep to that board?
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, that's fine. If everyone else is comfortable with it, I'm happy to.
Great.
That was great. Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
I'm glad that we have that example too, because it could very well be that, as I mentioned earlier, there might be a similar kind of advisory or citizens group that EAB may be asked to have a representative on around this collaborative learning circle around land recovery. So there could be another example like that coming forward. Justin, I was hoping that maybe I could just do one last visit of this mural board before we close up tonight. Is that okay with you?
It's fine with me. I guess we got 9 minutes in our regularly scheduled time.
All right. Oops. Hold on 1 second.
9 minutes away from being on Zoom for 12 hours today. Literally, without a break. Except for when I turned off my camera and ran to the bathroom.
I'm so sorry.
New world record.
So I'm going to just do a last share screen with you all of, I've done a little bit more sorting, labeling of the mural board we did earlier. And so this doesn't have to be the end statement of this, but I wanted to just kind of we won't try to move these onto the board, but I just wanted to get a sense from you all of this, if this feels like these are the kind of primary issues that you see you're wanting to work on and be paying attention to over this next 6 to 12 months. I say 6 to 12 months because, of course, our context changes significantly in some ways if the city goes back into full operation, if there's sort of a lifting of all these restrictions, et cetera. So the world is, you know, it's contingent. So anyway, I've tried to categorize these: the air quality, urban heat, energy systems change. Susan, in response to what you said, I sort of used climate emergency response to be a kind of broader term around the CMAP piece. And Mike, I took a little liberties here, and you can tell me to pull this out, but we had done a fair amount of discussion about not just soil health, but the sort of sequestration and the kind of carbon drawdown potential that work might create. Do you feel comfortable kind of lumping that into that title?
Absolutely, yeah.
So first, I guess the most important question is there anything missing? Like, is there any other topic or theme that you feel like is something that EAB should be tracking and positioning itself around that's not sort of shown in this set?
Well, just a quick point. Had this summer delivered some thunderstorm action or something of the sort of 2013 September, we would be having on here flooding as a concern in our river systems and risks of more intense rains producing more intense runoffs. And we don't have anything that actually speaks to flooding as a concern, which is also a climate change symptom. Just this year, obviously, was determined by dryness, heat, drought, and fires. So we shouldn't forget the flood risk. Had we written this in 2013, flooding would have been on here.
Yeah, good point, Marty.
We just need a summer where we have a big rain on snow event and then drought, and then we'll have both on the, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, you could say probably the same thing about how we didn't have any big fires of our own here.
Yeah.
So we weren't talking about that either.
I guess it's, like extreme water resources. We seem to be going back and forth between too much and too little. We've heard about the volatility of weather patterns has been increasing. And so, we're getting both tails from time to time.
Yeah.
Tail risks are probably increasing on both ends.
Other issues that people want to make sure we throw in here.
I still think stormwater is important, and I feel like I've pushed this in years past and it's never risen to the top, but if we're trying to list.
Sorry, this is. Okay, this is not going to. It's obviously getting late here. Stormwater, flooding, fire. Anything else?
And not to be any wordsmith here, but I don't know that we get the spirit of what we need to do in the energy system space with the word change. It really is a revolution. We're really requiring something to change on a very short time scale, and with the aim of preservation of a certain form of life, really. And so really it's energy system revolution more than it is change. The urgency is not quite there when we use the word change. But I don't want to alarm anyone with the word revolution. I mean, we're not socialists here, are we?
Anybody else want to vote strongly for using the word revolution instead of change?
I mean, I think Marty makes a good point, but I think probably can go either way for the sake of just the plot today. But I understand what you're saying.
I'm fine too, Mike. Yeah,
I think it's very valid though, because a change is just like a tweak, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about like systemic swapping of energy systems.
That's a better way of saying it, Mike. I agree. Yep.
All right, very good. Well, I want to respect our time. So Justin, I'll let you close, but I just want to thank everybody here for 2.5 more hours of Zoom. Mike, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. But my daughter brought me tacos, so that's.
Once again, welcome, Susan, to your now second meeting, I guess. And then Justin, thanks so much for letting me be so intrusive this meeting. Typically we would actually have a facilitator for our retreats, so it wouldn't be me. But I'll be, next meeting it'll be entirely back in your hands.
This was
great.
Yeah, this was a great meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
I enjoyed it.
And, yeah, see you everyone in a month.
Yep.
So you need to formally close the meeting.
I guess we are adjourned. If I don't hear there's nothing else to say.
Yeah, let's go.
Very
Thanks,
good.
everyone. Bye.
See you
Bon
later.
appetit, Mike.
Take care.
Bye.